Over to you, Pragya ma'am.
Hello. Good afternoon. Am I audible? Is mic on? Okay, excellent. Good afternoon. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. My name is Pragya Tiwari, and I'm here to introduce two brilliant young writers, Abeer Hoque and Kanza Javed. Kanza was born in Lahore and grew up in Lahore. And Kanza's first novel, her debut novel, Ashes, Wine and Dust, was nominated for the Deborah Jones South Asia Prize, and then since then has gone on to receive wider acclaim. Kanza studied English literature, and she was a research scholar on immigrant writing from Pakistan in America. And currently she teaches English literature in the Kanard College for Women in Lahore. A little bit about Ashes, Wine and Dust. I'm not going to go on really, but just give you a couple of my thoughts on the book. It's a story of a young woman called Miriam Amin, set between Washington and Lahore, set between Washington, America and Pakistan, essentially. It's a story of love and, it's a story of more than love, loss and pain. It's a story of memory, it's a story of journeys. It's a story of home and family, of middle-class life in Pakistan. But more than all of this, it's a story of, it's about the experience of being a woman in Pakistan. And quite appropriately, Kanza has dedicated the book to all the women in Pakistan who question. Abeer is a poet, photographer, and writer. She was born in Nigeria, lives in America, and has traveled across the world extensively. Her latest book is a memoir called Olive Witch. But today she's going to be talking about her second book. Is that right? Yes. Okay, well, her first book, second book, as you will, because Abeer is quite prolific, so it's difficult to keep track. But certainly her debut novel, which is called Lovers and Leavers. Lovers and Leavers is basically, it consists of 12 interconnected stories set across many different continents. As the title suggests, it is at its heart an exploration of love and separation. The characters that Abeer writes, they tend to stay on your minds long after you're done reading the book. The stories are wonderfully crafted. Lyrical prose interspersed with poetry and photographs, examining the many triumphs and tragedies of love. What we're going to be doing this afternoon is Kanza and Abeer are going to be taking turns in reading from their debut novels and also talking a little bit about the process of writing them. And then if we have some time in the end, and if you guys like, we will take some questions. So over to you guys.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to read so this Lovers and Leavers is a collection of interlinked short stories, poems, and photographs. And most of the stories are set in South Asia, and all of the characters are South Asian. So there's a couple of stories that have South Asian diaspora in Spain and in America. And what I was trying to do in the story was try to tell the story of love and loss through the perspectives of many different characters, as many as I could think of. So there's a maid who comes in a couple of the stories, who lives in Dhaka, in the capital city of Bangladesh. And then her employer is the subject of another story. The employer's son and two sons are subjects of another couple of stories. And then her sister, for example, and then her sister's son, who lives in the village, are also characters. So anyway, about half the stories are set in Bangladesh, 4 in India, and I'm going to read from one of the Bangladesh stories. And this particular one actually is, it's from the story called The Beauty of Belonging, and it's about a drug addict in Dhaka. And he's been kicked out of his house, and he's an artist. And because I want to sort of give you a beginning, middle, and end, I'm going to kind of start in the middle. Hopefully it'll be understandable, and so then you'll get kind of the end of the story as well. He's an unnamed character, but the beauty of belonging. I didn't go to Hoque's that summer to paint, though that's what I tell everybody. They've all been waiting for my second exhibition, even though it's been years since my first, the one which exposed me to that delicate sewage flush of elitism. Serves me right, though. I should have had the show in Bangladesh, not in Brooklyn. But I was living in America, those heady post-college years where you think you actually run your own life because you can almost pay your rent. If you have to pay your rent, that is. I should have come back, stopped living the hypocrisy sooner, or at least brought the hypocrisy closer to home, closer to its center. That way, the ignorant and loudmouth gallery gallivanters of Dhaka could have rightly pointed out the hackery I had produced. I had been going straight then for a year, bound by an insane promise to Ela, and it was driving me dumb. Of course, my paintings followed my sinking lead, but none of the New York hipster art fucks had the balls to point it out. Instead, it was all subversive talent, oil and water deconstructed, rewired and reverberant, and other shit I can't deign to reproduce now. I should say the photographs that are being projected, there's one for each of the stories, and so that's what you're seeing. Every last one of my paintings went for some outrageous price. I reneged on each sale by giving away my paintings in Prospect Park, one pastoral sunset after another, to whoever looked the longest. I'll never paint again. But I won't tell anybody that because I know that never will always come back and rub itself all over your stupid face. The truth is, I went to Cox's Bazaar to escape Dhaka and its tired trinkery, Dhaka and its faded winter, its melodramatic summer, Dhaka drowning me in Ela's love. That's the real deal. I was running away from Ela. Oh yeah, she said she had nothing left to give me, but I know what she meant, that she had too much to give, and it was spilling over my edges, costing her karmic energy by the second. That kind of talk kills me, even though I know it's not all crap. Thankfully, Ela's voice is too deep to be anything but goddamn sexy. She could make me hard by reading Daily Star headlines. True, it was the sports page and World Cup season, but still, tigers mauled and all the fucking rest, and there rose my desire under my kurta pajama. The first time I saw Ela, she was wearing a gray shalwar kameez, wet from the rain, and I immediately wanted to fuck her. In that post-colonial, back-to-your-tantric roots, brown erotica, woman-worshipping Western ways. No, I want you to come first. Then slipping into Eastern clothes. Sorry, you were too much for me, Premik. Next time. The problem is, you can't love and leave too often with brown girls. Even if you leave their bodies flushed and pulsing, which I do, thank you very much. I'm not one of those boys. You can't fuck and run in Dhaka, but even in the mutinous underground bars of New York, you could get that rep. Whether or not you make it perfectly clear from the beginning that all you ever wanted was love without the strings. It's the strings that fuck you up. Bind me to you, and I'll show you the surest path to flight. It's true, though Kin tells me, but let's not talk about traps. Besides, we need more ice. Can you get some from your upstairs neighbor? You're the one who needs more ice, bhai, I say. I can't drink that shit, ice or no. We can't all have your high-class taste, though Kin says, swigging the last of his whiskey. Fuck off, man, I say. At least I knew what it was like to be middle class. We both laugh, but we both know who's older money. Though Kin's family is from Kolkata's bastions of wealth, going back generations. My pop only made his money in the last couple of decades. And seeing how my brother uses his slime ball connections to grease things, I don't know how long the cash will last. I believe in karma, as it turns out. One bad turn for another. On the way back from the neighbors, I stop in the loo. Seems Rox doesn't believe in locking doors. She's sitting on the toilet, but waves me in. I only need to shake out the ice crumbles at the bottom of the bag into the sink, but when I glance into the mirror, she's watching me. I leave the bag in the sink and turn around. As I lean down slowly, I can see her legs closing into a dark velvet upside-down V, the oldest mystery of them all. I have an urge to paint her, on her. A tired O'Keeffe image comes into my head. What the bleeding edgers don't understand is that we create those standard, overdone images even when there's something pure driving us. We do it because of the purity. All the ways to jack it up, splatter it, deconstruct it, build it back, they're all just ways to get back to the original feeling, at best, foils at worst. That's why I love you means something even now. Ila was the first Bengali girl I loved. Hell, the first girl. Before that was a string of white girls. Even when I came back to Dhaka, it was easy finding them, a new crop of NGOers every season. But Ila, with her undulating curves and hair, got me for some reason. I couldn't stop touching her. I couldn't stop painting her. No drug ever felt as good. Drugs and Ila together would probably blow my mind, but for reasons both logistical and perhaps lucky, I never had the shot. When Ila found out about my habits, she got me to swear I'd never do anything when I was with her. At first, that was easy enough, and then it got harder. I saw Ila less. She doesn't realize it, but how often I see her means nothing. When she's around, the world shrinks and fits into my heart. When I'm gone, my heart shrinks and disappears into the world. The bathroom room is open and a breeze flicks at me. I'm so close to rocks that I can squint the glitter of her eyes into pinprick stars, growing, falling, and fading, a living painting. Or is it a painted life? I clap suddenly between her legs and look at my hands. Fucking mosquito. Black ink, fairy imprint across my palms. I grab the bag of ice and bang out of the bathroom. Every moment that ticks in this timeline of us, it lasts forever or a day. So when I come back into the room, it's as if I never left. It's as if I'm coming in for the first time. I freeze, as I sometimes have to when the two realities coincide. Welcome, Dokin says. Or is it welcome back? I've long since stopped being surprised at his knowing. I know my internal monologue is fucked up sometimes, as in I don't know when it's internal and when it's allowed. But even when I've made a ludicrous leap of imagination, Dokin somehow follows. When Rox enters, she goes straight to Dokin's side and sits neatly beside him as if bidden. The room seems darker, so I can't see her eyes anymore, thank God. Dokin seems oblivious. He's in the matrix, working the strip of aluminum foil, pressing it, stretching it, running the lighter flame along it. When he's placed the little red pill on the edge of the aluminum, he hands me the lighter. For all his suave ways, Dokin can't keep a lighter lit while he inhales, so I always do the honors. The rolled up 100 taka note is sitting on a box of cigarettes. He puts it in his mouth and waits as I hold the lighter along the silver strip. A second later, a tendril of smoke is born. As it widens and wends, Dokin's breath calls to it. I trace the lighter under the path of the pill as it smokes and slides down the strip. The smoke is now entering me, that familiar metallic tang girding my lungs. Rox's whole body, not just her eyes, in darkness now. Dokin is a silhouette, then a shadow, then nothing. I am alone. As I breathe, each rib contracts under my muscles, under my skin. I can see the building of my cubist body. It slowly becomes. Fuck, there is nothing like it. This understanding of why we are, this salience of being, itself a reason. It's why I still pop, inhale, shoot, chew, lick, snort, suck, absorb all of it, despite the steel pincers flexing on my brain some nights, most nights, every night. I know what I have to do, the thing that always belonged to me, the way anything belongs to you in the moment you engage. I pick up my paintbrush. A second later, a lifetime later, I feel Dokin shaking me. His voice fades in and out like a pirated soundtrack. He's telling me something absurd. He's telling me not to die. Ela wavers like a flame into my candle wax mind, midnight skin and midnight hair. I'm not in my room anymore. A bumper car world resolves. It grumbles and shakes around me. It pixelates, fluorescence in my eyes. Ela wavers out.
So I'll be reading from the chapter 6 of the book, Ashes, Wine and Dust. Before I proceed, I'd like to tell you a little about the book and how it came to be. It's a story of a young girl who is trying to comprehend several losses in her life. Firstly, she's trying to understand the loss of her grandfather, who dies when she's 8 years old, and also the fact that he's a very famous character in the family for having an affair during the partition days. So she's very protective of him. And after he dies, she suddenly becomes this constant reminder of her grandfather because she resembles him so much. So the grandmother, who is in the mourning period, takes Mariam back to her village. So maybe she can fill that void that the grandfather left, even though they both had a very unstable relationship. There she discovers the stories of several people from the domestic help, the tailors, the maids, the nannies, often the discredited people in the society. And she tries to understand that there's a world that is much beyond her own imagination. So I'll be reading from a little bit from the chapter where she's living with the grandmother and also her blind sister, Gulshan. In the mornings, they lounged under the sun in the veranda on polished divans next to grandfather's hookah. Dadi tried to fix her old tape recorder, and her blind sister stared blankly at the green plants. Sometimes she counted her steps and watered them, and sometimes she showed me ladybirds she caught on her fingertips. She would let the colored insect crawl on her yellow fingernails, and then by connecting her fingertips with mine, she would let it roam freely on my palm. "Come on," she whispered, "speak to it." Winter brings home its own stories and misery. Because of its open fields and houses, people froze easily in Dadi Jan's village. All the lambs and cows were relocated to well-built rooms with low fire and food, and the houses would smell of fresh manure and ashes. During the afternoon, the men disappeared to work, and the women came out of the houses with children on their backs and loose veils over their heads to sit in the sunshine and watch the trains ramble down the foreign rail lines. The porters in their orange uniforms would appear like little dots of fire, squatting, smoking, roaring with laughter as they waited for the train to slowly arrive. Women, some dull, some bright, looked out of the barred windows at the dancing dots of fire, and the men stood at the door of the train with their duffel bags over their shoulders. Excitement would trickle down the faces of children. It was the most majestic thing that they had ever seen. The water remained calm during the winters, and the farmer seemed less angry. Scarecrows remained perched in the soil with an insensitive expectancy. Crows and sparrows sat on their shoulders and pecked at hollow heads. Hamida said the real activity happened where the men worked, far away from the railway station and the houses. In a huge biscuit factory with blue windows and a steel head, they gathered around the ingiti with a deck of cards, behind which were the pictures of Bollywood actresses of the 80s in flattering poses. Their faces were uncanny and bitter as tension built in the game. Some went home lucky, and the rest waited for another episode of drawing cards. When the night came crashing down, the village folded instantly. The villagers slept, the insects cried, toads conspired, the strays wailed. On one such night, Dadi caressed my head to make me fall asleep. Her face was bathed in a golden light, and it dazzled like an open flower. Her eyes burnt with delight and happiness. Her hand was soft, and her thin silver hair was tied back in a braid. She traced the moon with her hands and then pretended to have possessed it in the center of a palm. She brought the imaginary shape closer to my sleeping face and whispered, "Don't wake up, my darling. You're in a dream world where reality is metamorphosized and you're away from everything that is discomforting. Don't wake up yet." Her bangles made a soft sound. I held her delicate hand and closed my eyes as a lovely night fell over me like a curtain. "I hate my dreams. I'm sick of them," I heard her say. "But you, my child, have so much to see, so much to understand in life." In that moment, I realized that inside me was a power that could take away her pain, an element that soothed her aching heart. And I was afraid that if I went away, my power would fade away with it, and her heart would stop beating. So when Father said he couldn't pick me up for another 2 weeks because of work, I did not mind. Gulshan called me to her room one afternoon. I rubbed moisturizer on her back and noticed that her body was burned. I traced my finger over the skin as if over a map, but didn't have the courage to question her about the history of the bruise. While wiping off spilled tea from the body of what my grandmother called dandy British teacups, I explained to Dadi what I had witnessed. She looked around and lowered her tone as if about to unravel some dirty secret. "She was a bad child, a rebel like you call it. She has done some terrible, incomprehensible things in her past. That burn is from when our father hit her once. She fell into a tub of burning hot water." I trembled as the episode flickered before my eyes. "Why do you think she lost her eyesight? Do you believe in karma? The doctors couldn't tell us how she lost her eyesight." I turned around so she couldn't see the altering expressions on my face and began wiping the tea stains from the counter. "That's what God does if you meddle in his affairs. That's what he always does. And then he makes the entire family pay for it. One bad seed ruins the entire crop. Why else do you think I was married so late? God and his funny ways of vengeance." She shook her head as she compartmentalized the divine. She didn't stop there. She continued and told me that my life would gradually change too, and I might experience tremendous amount of pains whether I liked it or not. Chai stains on the bed, puddles on the carpet, dirt on the wall, such things are transient. What is real is the inevitable pain every woman experiences in her life. By that, I don't mean childbirth, other kinds of pain, a heartbreak, death of a lover, infidelity, losing a child to various things, death, this world. A woman is built to endure great pains. But don't worry, a real woman never gives up. And then she left it, just like that, and continued to work in that kitchen. That reminded me of what grandfather once said. Pain transcends through an invisible crack in your body and slithers inside of you. It travels in your vessels and befriends every organ and leaves a great impression as a souvenir, a shaped scar, a burning bruise, or a deep wound. This souvenir is a constant reminder of the excruciating past. The brutal wound throbs, and it reminds you that the pain has not yet let you free. The tattoo still burns. The tattoo always burns. It leaves you with two options, he said to me, either restoring yourself or unraveling altogether. If you're able to restore yourself, the tattoo eventually fades away, leaving only a faint imprint, which too later dissolves. I had only listened to him quietly, the same way I now listen to my grandmother.
Thank you for that, Abeer. Thank you for that, Kanza. Would you guys, before you take any questions, would you like to talk a little bit about the process of writing your first novel. Since the session is called Beginnings, would you like to talk a little bit about how you made the beginning?
Do you want to start?
Thank you. I began writing when I was very young, and it was more like a healing exercise after I lost my grandmother. Now, a child who lives in a very supervised, sheltered, middle-class family in Pakistan has never really confronted a real tragedy. For me, that was a big, big loss. And I had been writing before, but that's when I really decided that this is something I wish to do. That's the only way I could get, in a way, consolation or therapy and be healed in a way. So we moved to the village for a couple of weeks when we were trying to understand where to bury my grandmother and all those things. And that's when I was 16 at that time. And that's when I really encountered the domestic help that we so easily ignore in our lives. I started listening to their stories. They started to speak to me more often. I began writing down these little episodes about who they were, where they've come from, what they wish to do with their lives, things that we don't often listen. And what was really fascinating for me were the children that the mothers usually drag with them to the funerals, and they don't even know who has died. For them, it's just another funeral, and they have so many questions in their mind that are often ignored. So I began my novel writing about a child in mourning and what mourning and loss is for an 8-year-old person. And with years and years, the novel kept changing its form and spirit. I went to States for a semester. I heard more stories. The first novel is always very personal. You do a different kind of research for it. It's more, you're more vulnerable than you don't know what you're doing, especially I come from a family where there's nobody who writes. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. It's a very intense experience. I was frightened, but I knew I had to do it because I would have been in great pain if I hadn't written this story down.
How long did it take you?
I'm sorry?
How long did it take you?
It took me 7 years. I finished it when I was 24. I just turned 25 this month. So to start writing when you're 17 and to have this isolated, solitary experience in an age when people are shopping and dating, it's a very different kind of a world you expose yourself to.
Yeah. It's an impressive story. I started writing The Lovers and Leavers as my first foray into fiction. I had been writing memoir for a long time, and so I wanted to try my hand at writing stories, short stories, and I actually went to Bangladesh. My parents are originally from there, my family's originally from there, but I was born in Nigeria and I grew up there, and then we moved to the States when I was in high school. So Bangladesh was a place I had visited, but I'd never lived there. So for me, it was a way to explore Bangladesh and maybe find a home there, and also to try my hand at fiction and writing these stories. And I kind of thought that I would be writing these kind of exotic stories because they were set in this kind of an alien place to me. Even though I ostensibly looked like everybody there, I certainly felt like I had arrived at another planet. And I immediately, I mean, thinking of what you're talking about, our domestic help, I immediately became friends with the maids and the drivers of my aunt who I was staying with at the time. And I ended up writing a lot of the stories based on their stories or my conversations with them or what I imagined their lives to be like outside of the confines of the home where I was staying. And I remember thinking there's one particular maid who inspired a couple of the stories in this book, who had taken on a husband, a lover. I don't know if she was actually strictly married to him. And he lived in another city and he had another wife, so this maid was kind of his second wife. And he would come and visit her every now and then. And at some point she came into my room distraught and she asked me a question that I had asked myself, which was, why hasn't he called? And this is a woman who had grown up in the village. She's in her 50s and she's never been to school. And she was basically having the same experience that anyone has in love. And so this idea that I had that I was going to be writing these stories that were different from the ones I would have written if I'd stayed in America was obviously a flawed flawed thought. And all over the world, we think about the same things, about love and ambition and family and money. And so the stories in the book are a reflection of that, of different characters, different setting, but like all kind of the same themes we all think about.
Abeer, one of the questions that I had while reading the book is that, like I mentioned before, she sort of experiments with the form by weaving photographs and poems into the narrative. I'm not quite sure. You put together a PowerPoint presentation. Did that work? Is that on or?
So yeah, it wasn't meant to go along with the story exactly, but basically what I was trying to do was, my first idea for the book was something a lot more experimental, where I'd have a lot more pictures, a lot more poems, and you would be able to read different versions of the story by looking at these different genres. It became a far more narrative sort of thing for many reasons. One of them was that publishers don't like things that are very experimental, and photographs are expensive to print. So I ended up scaling it down, and so every story starts with a photograph and a poem. And so there's 12 stories, and so the 12 photographs that you saw cycling through before are the beginnings of each of the stories. And of course, the photographs are real, and the stories are fiction. So they're meant to sort of provide a mood, or maybe a sense of the character or the space of the story, rather than being strictly, obviously, can't be strictly the story.
Kanza, you explore two very different worlds in your book. You read a little bit about life in rural Pakistan, but then as the novel goes along, you travel with it to Washington and explore the lives of immigrants in America. What made you want to explore these two very diverse worlds in juxtaposition?
It was more like a challenge for me, because when I started writing about the lives in village, I've spent most of my life commuting back and forth, village and the cosmopolitan city of Lahore, where I'm born and bred. So I was very familiar with that culture, was very familiar with the stories. It's just that with the first novel, you really, really have to listen a little more carefully when you're in the process of writing. So I was in my comfort zone, but I also like to believe that a writer should push the limits, even if it's with the first book. You should write the unfamiliar, and if you're not frightened whilst you're writing the book, then there's something wrong with you. So I moved to DC just for a couple of months, and I was 19. And it was the first woman in my family to ever step out of the country all by herself, thanks to my amazing parents. But that's when I really discovered who I was on my own, without a society to back me up, without my parents' identity. And I exposed myself to a lot of immigrants, South Asian immigrants. And I started listening to their stories. Now, this was a time when I was only reading American and British literature. I had no idea that there was a South Asian literature, indigenous, diaspora, and all these things, because back home in schools, they start with the Greek tragedies, and then they move on to the Victorian, the Elizabethan, the Victorian, the modern novel, and then they stop for a while, because they're like, oh, it's South Asia, you're familiar with it, and all those things. So to hear the stories of the immigrants, and to hear about stories of a woman who must have migrated to the US with children on her own when she was in her early 20s, all these things were very fascinating. But I did not consciously integrate it into my book that I have to preach this to the people, that there are people outside going through these things. There are writers far superior than me who are doing much better job. And it kind of happened in this way. So I felt that my character also had to step out of her comfort zone, and she goes to Washington, D.C. with a relative who completely shifts her personality. She's a different person when she's in D.C., she's a different person when she's in Lahore. I got really excited about this idea of double consciousness and dual personalities and hybridity. I started reading more. So it was like an experiment that I was doing. And at a young age in which I was writing, it was something new that I was doing. It might not be new in the literary sphere, but was really trying to push the boundaries by experimenting with these two worlds that are so different yet so alike, because people everywhere, the human experience is the same.
Abeer, you again, coming back to the form of your novel, it's actually like you mentioned before, and I did as well in my introduction, that it's actually 12 interconnected stories. Was it ever a challenge for you to give these 12 short stories the shape of a novel?
Yeah, that's the idea of a novel in stories is maybe a marketing gimmick. I'm not sure, but I did. When I started writing them, I hadn't really thought about what form it was going to take in altogether. But then when I had started getting characters that were repeating throughout, there's 12 stories and there's 9 different characters, I started thinking about how I could interconnect them. And so one of my big challenges after all the stories were written was to figure out how to order them and then also how to connect them each within each other. So then having references to different themes or characters within the different stories. And so that was kind of I spent a lot of time on that, even more so than just rewriting the stories, was just figuring out how I would place them next to each other so that you would get a story, a chronology that made sense. So the stories would, like if you had one character appear, there's a boy who's a teenage boy in Barcelona, and then we see him 20 years later getting married in India. And so to have that chronology stay the same and then also have the stories themselves sort of progress in a way that you felt like you were getting somewhere at the end. That was a challenge. I'm not sure I accomplished what I was trying to do because they are such different stories, but that was the goal.
I think for what it's worth, they come together beautifully. But the process of getting your, editing your novel or revising your drafts, as you did with the stories, in your struggle was to, to order the stories. I want to ask you a little bit, Kanza. It's widely believed that the real challenge actually begins when you finish your first draft, whether or not you agree with it. What was that process like for you?
I think you never really finish it unless somebody comes and say, you have finished this book, it's good, I'm going to publish it. This is exactly how it was for me. I would be half in the book, then I would start reading it again, and I would start from the scratch because I was unhappy with something. I felt the emotions were missing, something was missing. It's very easy to conceive a story and give birth to characters in your head, but it's very difficult to write it on paper and then to revise and redraft it over and over again. But I was very unsure once I was done with the first manuscript. I would like to give a lot of credit to my editor Anchal, who read the book after I submitted the first draft. That was the revision that really helped me understand the book. Now, I was a young person with absolutely no experience with writing. I was not in touch with any writers. I have never taken a creative writing course. I had no idea what I was doing. I struggled a lot with the form and structure of the book. That doesn't come to me naturally. It's very analytical and mathematical for me still. So I wanted help, and that's when I examined my book as not a writer but a critic and a scholar. Like I am a student of literature. That's how I do it with other books. Then it became more like a research-oriented critical examination of my own book. I had to disconnect with it, and I did disconnect with it. So that's the professional editing is what really helped me. I don't know what I was doing unsupervised, but
Writing, that's what you were doing.
yes, writing and struggling.
But it's remarkable that you could create that sort of distance from your work and examine it critically. It's something that writers continue to struggle with all their lives. I know I do still. So, well, I don't know how much time we have left, but 20 minutes? Okay, so maybe what we can do is take a couple of questions if there are in the audience. Yes, there are. I see quite a number of hands going up. And then if we have time, maybe a quick reading. I'm not sure we'll have time, but we'll see. Okay, so can I please request that you keep your questions on point so that we can try and take as many questions as possible because there are a number of hands up. Can we start in front?
Are there any writers you have been influenced with, or the style of some writers you've been very, very influenced with?
Is this for both of us? Okay, thank you. Yes, I am. I have to go back to the old stuff because that's what really touches a chord with me. I'm very, very fascinated by the works of Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath. And nowadays I'm really obsessed with Pakistani writer Nadeem Aslam. So, because their work has a certain lyricism that I love, and it's very hard to find it in postmodern novels. So I connect with that, and I love their examination of the human mind. I love how deep they can go, and I love their grim subjects. This is a tragic novel, and people ask me, how can you write a tragedy when you're only 24? I said, it came naturally to me. I wasn't doing anything. Maybe it's the kind of literature that I read, but these are three writers that I'm obsessed with.
Again, we'll just go from front to back, so it's simpler.
Hi, Kanza, this is again for you. I'd like to ask you, because you said it took you 7 years to write this novel. You started when you were about 17. Would you say this novel is also a reflection of your own journey as a person? I mean, do you think in some ways it reflects it? Because it does seem to me from what you said that you sort of draw upon, from personal experiences. And I mean, you said it was like a healing experience, but was that it? And also, did you expect that, this is your first novel and it's going to be published and one day you'll be nominated for the awards? They were two different questions, sorry. But
it is, the first novel always springs from within you. It's very hard to say that it's not autobiographical. I don't think any writer would say that to the first book. So yes, it is semi-autobiographical. But it's funny that I did not know the depth of my own emotions until I started writing it. And then I said, wow, this is how I felt when this particular thing happened in my life. It's only when I'm writing on paper. But I have taken, of course, my poetic license to maneuver the reality and manipulate some accidents. But yes, it is very much semi-autobiographical. And what was your second question? I did. I was very young when I knew that I wanted to write, and I also knew that I wanted to be read. It was not because I wanted to be acclaimed or famous, not at all. I would have taken another route than if I wanted that, but it was because I wanted the story it's a tribute to my own city, Lahore, and the changing times. It starts from this Lahore, which is a cultural hub, a peaceful city, and as you see in the novel, it completely becomes tainted with political and religious violence, and the citizens feel like immigrants in their own land. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring out another tribute to Lahore and show it to the rest of the world, how similar, yet how different we are in some ways.
No, can we just take it from, if we have time, we'll come back to you for sure. Back there, over there.
Hello. So my question is to Abeer. Your books are a beautiful amalgamation of photographs, poems, and even stories. So I have personally witnessed this, that when somebody is into an art form, they like if somebody writes poem, she finds it very difficult to write stories. If she's writing a lot of stories, it's a little difficult for her to switch to writing poems. So has that ever been a trouble for you to figure out what kind of form do you want to write it in? Like you have a voice inside, you want to spill it in the form of a poem or in the form of a story. Has it ever been difficult for you to decide that?
I don't think so. Maybe just because maybe different parts of my brain are at work when I'm writing prose versus poetry. So I haven't found a conflict between that. What I have tried to do, because I focused on fiction, I'd first started off writing poetry and then I moved into prose. So when I started writing fiction, I was, and maybe this is the way I think, I started thinking of it as poems, but then I would have to make them into sentences. And then I would have to give backstory or explain what was happening around it or put in dialogue. And so I think maybe I start thinking of it in a poetic, like with a poetic brain, and then depending on what I'm trying to do, I will expand it into a story.
Over there. Can we?
Hi, there is a question to both of you, that as you both belong to Southeast Asian countries, this area, by none of you reside in those countries. But if we talk about the women writers over there, I mean, like Taslima, and recently the bloggers in Bangladesh, and if I kind of consider the Afghanistani writer, the Sushmita Banerjee, the Kabliwala's wife, both try to talk about love, female sexuality, and a little bit of the political and religious extremism. While you were writing your novel and your short stories, how this kind of thing was in your mind? Why, was it is a consciously you try to deal with that, or you try to consciously avoid with that? How you dealt with these kind of things?
Yeah, well, I think I understood your question as how one writes in the face of, for example, the danger that the Bangladeshi bloggers face, which is something that, I can't even speak to what that must feel like, because the people who are being targeted in Bangladesh are they're political bloggers, secularists, and they're incredibly brave for writing the kinds of things that they do in the face of such danger. I can't say that I'm in the same position. First of all, they're not attacking English language writers yet, anyway. And I don't live in Bangladesh full time. I lived there for some time, and then I moved back to the States. So, but just to address that question of, I think in a way you cannot think about what it is, what people will think of your work in order to write it. You sort of have to put it out of mind. I thought about it in the context of writing memoir, because you think, oh, what will my mother think? Or other people will read this and know who these personal things about yourself. But I find that I would have to put all of that out of mind in order to just write down what it is I want to say. And then just worry about that stuff later. And I'm not sure if that's the process that other people who are actually in real danger of their lives do, but I'm all power to them for doing it.
Well, my novel isn't really doesn't touch upon any taboo subjects, at least not right now. I'm not interested in politics as of yet. I'm more interested in human relationships and human politics. I'm interested in violence, physical and emotional, that's perpetrated between people, but I'm more interested in the aftermath of violence, what happens to an individual person, his own sentiments and his own feelings. That's what my writing, at least for now, is about. So there are so many people back home who are writing about religion and politics already. That was not really what I wanted to do. So I knew that I would have absolutely no problem in getting published and being read. So I really steered away from that direction. That's all I can say.
What we'll probably do now is take one or two questions together, if that's okay, and then maybe you can answer them all at once. Okay, over there.
Hi, my question is to both of you. It's related to draft. I want to ask how many drafts are there while you're writing a novel or short stories? And is it a rushed first draft and then you take your time in the second one? Or is it, which draft take the longest time? So that's what I want to ask.
In the second row, please.
Hi, so my question is to Kanza ma'am. So when one reads your book, initially one could figure out that as a person, Mariam feels too much, contrary to other people of her age, or how difficult was it for you to map those feelings of a child to an adult? I'm sure it's not easy to give words to those thoughts when as a kid how difficult was this journey for you to map the inner emotions of a person?
Can we take one more question? The lady in the pink cardigan, and then maybe you can answer it.
Thank you. Firstly, a big congratulations to both of you. I think, we missed that as an audience. So basically, my question is to both Abeer and Kanza. Kanza, as you spoke about it and given your age and your first novel and your experience, it definitely looked like it was kind of a catharsis for you. As you said, as you ended your speech with saying that if I did not write it, it would have pained inside. For Abeer, again, I think since this is your first fiction, but then, as you said, you have been writing, I really want to understand a little more about, this catharsis versus synthesized emotion, if I can call the, opposite of it. What really comes out, I understand the first book and personal experience, but then you write short stories, you write a host of things, you write things in third persons and from other skins. So how can you really, sort of bring it out? On one hand, this catharsis process, and the other, on the other hand, this, the synthesized emotion or touching other people's life or putting yourself in their shoes and thinking from that sense. So that's my question.
I think catharsis and healing exercises are for people who are very sensitive and vulnerable anyway, that they understand that they have to fill that void and they have to come out and get closure. So it's, for me, it was very easy to walk in other people's shoes because as a child, I was I'll answer both the questions together, I'll try to. As a child, I was very removed from the social scene. I was more like an observer. I was very displaced and disoriented. I was not one of the famous children. I was not good in anything, in studies and all those things. So I had a chance to look at the world through a really different lens. And talking about children and characters, I've never really felt myself connect much with children, but I surprised myself when I started writing this, and I was very unsure if I'm doing the right thing. Is this how a child would think? But then I was very fortunate that I began teaching at a school with 8-year-olds. And I got to converse with them on a daily basis. And I understood that there's a chance that a child might actually feel this way. So I was very convinced while writing. So that's how I really did everything. With the draft, do you want to talk about it?
You can talk.
Then you will, okay.
Yeah.
With the draft, it depends on every writer. It varies, but I can only, of course, speak for myself. This book took a lot of revising. It took around 12 to 13 drafts. That's a lot. Of course, it's really hard for a writer to understand what element is failing in the book because you feel so connected with the character, so you can't look through an objective lens. And you can't listen to any friend or anybody who you give the manuscript to hear that, you know what, this scene is not working, something is not working. So you need an objective insight into the matter. So when I started working with a professional editor, that's when I realized about what was not working in the book, how I have to recraft the entire thing. So it's a really, really long, exhausting exercise. And it's really hard to disconnect with the book, which I was able to do it. When you take 7 years when you spend 7 years in a character's head, it's very exhausting, tiring, stifling. The minute this book was out, I took a sigh of relief, but at the same time, I feel so empty and hollow right now. But this is, it depends on every writer, but this book actually took 11 to 12 drafts till we said, you know what, this is it. But I don't read the book, because if I do, I actually text my editor with saying, you know, we could have, she's like, stop. Stop it. It's published. Stop. Yes.
Well, a quick aside, Tolstoy, who's said to have given us one of the greatest novels in history, War and Peace, wrote it over many, many, many years, and I don't think we still have a fix on how many drafts there were of War and Peace. All we know is that there are suitcases full of his drafts, so there you have it. There's definitely not one way to do this. Sorry, Abeer.
No, it's absolutely true. It's all dependent on the writer. I had the good fortune of actually going through an MFA program as a way of launching my whole becoming a writer. So I had sort of from the very first workshop experience, where I had lots and lots of feedback from all these different my fellow students as well as teachers, which was extremely helpful to me, because it's kind of training for life, because you have to learn to take critiques and then use them to revise your work. But then also the experience of giving critiques, and in a generous way, in a constructive way, is also something that I found, something I'm still learning to do, both to take it and also to give that kind of feedback that'll be useful to somebody. But yeah, so in terms of drafts, I have no idea how many. The memoir that I just published, I rewrote probably 10 times over the course of, I think, 10 years. And yeah, speaking of being sick of your main character, and the main character was me, that I was rewriting this book, yeah, you can't escape yourself. But luckily I've got this, maybe all writers have to have some kind of ego. So every time I finished a draft, I'd be like, it's perfect now. And then I'd get another round of feedback or rejections and be like, all right, we'll have to go back to the drawing board. So yeah, it's kind of a continuous thing until someone tells you to stop. I don't remember what your question was now. I have short-term memory loss. Oh, right. And so I think just sort of playing off what you said, I think there's, and also my experience of writing poetry, I think I always start with an emotional truth that's actually, it's real in your real life, and so even if you're writing fiction, the emotional truth or integrity of your writing is going to be true to you. And so you can get an idea of actually who the author is in a way from fiction, because they're going to be writing about things in a way that makes sense to them and is true to them. And so I think I start there, and then maybe if I write out a scene that's based on some emotional core, then later on in the revisions is when I go back and look at it intellectually and see whether it's actually telling the story I wanted to tell, etc.
Okay, I don't know how much time we have. We have 5 minutes. Okay, well, 5 minutes isn't enough for reading, but if there are any more questions, maybe we can take another 1 or 2 more questions, and if there aren't, maybe I can ask you guys 1 or 2 more questions before we finish. Is there any other question? Okay, there's one right at the back over there.
Hello. I wanted to ask you, how important was it, did you, as a first-time writer, need an agent to go to the publisher, or did you go directly, and how did you go about that? Getting it published, like as a first-time writer, so.
For me, it was integral for me to get an agent, because I was writing I was writing on my own. I had no it's really good to have to be in an MFA program when you have so many tutors and so many prominent writers and friends telling you about what you're doing. I did not have any of that, and I had no idea about how the publishing world operates. Coming from Pakistan, there's a dearth of publishing houses, and even if you do select anybody, there's a great chance that you will only be somebody in Pakistan, and that too for just a brief amount of time. They don't have big marketing plans and everything. So I approached an agent in New Delhi, and that's how the entire world unraveled to me, and I understood that writing was much more easier than being published. And so through them, I explored this world. They introduced me to publishers. I understood the process of contracts and networking. The book really, really becomes a product, and I learned that in GLF, that it's actually a product. It's something so personal. You write, and then you have to sell it and talk about money all the time. I've been attending parties, and I've been like, what? But this is how this happens. So for me, I think the agency is wonderful, and I would actually continue to work with them.
I don't have an agent. That's maybe the bane of my existence so far. I live in the States, and it's really hard to get an agent there. And I think there's sort of a bias against writers of color. I think it's harder to get published there, harder to get represented. And so I've looked, and I've not been successful as of yet. But this book got published in India through HarperCollins India, where I think in India there's a different model where you can actually approach the publishers directly. You don't necessarily have to have an agent to do that. Whereas in the States, if you wanted to go through HarperCollins US, you'd have to have an agent. The big publishers don't look at unsolicited authors. They'll only look at manuscripts that are referred to them by agents they trust. So I was lucky enough to hook up with an editor at HarperCollins India who liked my work and published, and I signed a 2-book deal with them. So that's kind of where I am now, but I'm still looking for a US-based publisher so that it would have that distribution in the States, because Indian publishers have a more limited reach in those other parts of the regions.
Okay, one last question, and then we can wrap this up. Did you want to ask a question? Okay, so we will end with the lady that we started with. If you can just pass the mic up front here.
I can see 2 very beautiful, independent, and such strong personalities sitting here, 2 beautiful girls. But do you think your stay in the US has created so much of difference in your personality, on your perspective, which is very, very clearly reflective in your writings as well, in your personalities and in your writing as well. But the ironical part is your writings are so deeply connected with your countries still. So this is something very beautiful. What do you have to say to this?
I think place is always going to be integral to all of my work, for my photography as well as my writing. And I grew up in Nigeria, but we were in a little Bangladeshi bubble. We ate Bangladeshi food at home, we spoke Bangla, we wore Bangladeshi clothes. And so I've always grown up with this idea that I was Bangladeshi. Even though I didn't live ever in Bangladesh, we would visit there, and it was always like visiting somewhere else and then coming back home, which whether that meant Nigeria or the States. And so when I went back to Bangladesh, it was kind of a way to take that into my identity as well, or to incorporate it into my identity. And so yeah, all the places that I've lived are part of me and part of my writing.
For me, I think wherever in the world I go, I'll always come back to Lahore, or Lahore will always be within me. It's very hard to remove me from my city. But yes, America polished me in so many ways. I exposed myself to a lot of great people there. And just to feel liberated and independent in so many ways, the kind of family that I grew up in, I didn't have that kind of independence before. Then also just small little things to expose yourself to the big libraries there, and just to travel on your own and just talk to whoever you want and just pick a part of their stories here and there in different parts of the States. So yes, it has really, really helped me grow as a person and as a writer.
Okay, thank you Abeer, thank you Kanza, and thank you all of you for listening to us.
It was indeed a fascinating session, a little token of appreciation from our side. JLF book available at the info desk. It's a souvenir, lest you forget the wonderful time you spent over here in Diggy Palace over the last 5 days. It's a collector's item. You can please go and have a look at it. There's a little change in schedule at the front lawns from 2:30 to 3:30. It is the world's worst script cuneiform, Irving Finkel, introduced by William Dalrymple. There would be a Nukkar Natak right in front of Darbar Hall at 4:45 by Yuva Ekta Foundation, Finding Me. It's a part of JLF outreach program. Thank you for attending the session. To know the next session at JLF, you can give a missed call on 9251-301-339 and receive them on your phone. Win a chance to win JLF goodies. Tweet using the hashtag ZJLF. The more you tweet, the more points you would get. Exciting prizes are up for grabs. For more details, visit the information desk. Our next session here at Darbar Hall would be from 2:30 to 3:30, readings